Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue on our previews for each team in the NFC South. Today we have the Carolina Panthers, who were the worst team in the NFL in 2023 and are hoping to build their way back up, because last year they didn't even benefit from having their own first round pick as well. That was sent to Chicago for the Bryce Young selection in 2023. So the Panthers definitely in a low spot right now, but they're hoping things can change there with the hire of Dave Canales. Looks like we have a typo there. Apologies for the video audience there, but Dave Canales was signed to a 6-year contract to become the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. That is, 6 years is a significant deal to hand out. Mike McDonald might have also gotten 6 years, but the standard is usually less than that. So what that tells me is that the Panthers are sort of understanding of the current situation that they are in and are willing to give Canales a little bit of a longer leash as he tries to build up this Carolina program. Because, for the past few years, it's definitely been messy for them. And ultimately, with Canales as well, you talk about a guy who has been one of the hottest trending names in terms of NFL coaches of the past few seasons, where over the past 3 years, it was a little bit of a meteoric rise. Now, again, been coaching since 2009, so it's not like he isn't qualified or he hasn't put in his time, but feels like just coming off of the 2022 season, I started hearing the name Canales because of the work that he did with Geno Smith as their quarterbacks coach and their coordinator of the passing game, I believe he was. Then he was the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay for just one season, helped out Baker Mayfield, and now he is a head coach. That all happening within the span of 3 seasons. And the last time I at least remember somebody on a rise that fast was when Brandon Staley was hired to be the head coach of the LA Chargers a few years ago, where he went from Denver's outside linebacker coach to the Rams defensive coordinator to the Chargers head coach in a similar 3-season span. And obviously that did not work out for the Chargers. So now here, I think with Canales, I have a lot more confidence in him. The very impressive job that he's done in terms of restoring quarterback talent, like I just mentioned, with Geno Smith in 22, Baker Mayfield in 23, and the Panthers are desperately hoping that he can continue on that trajectory by helping out Bryce Young, after the Panthers traded up to get him with the first overall pick in 2023, was pretty disappointing with just 2,877 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Now, the common consensus, and rightfully so, is that Bryce Young was to some degree set up to fail a little bit because the roster was just abysmal around him. And running into last year with a 30-something-year-old Adam Thielen trying to be your wide receiver one, I think he was 32 last year, having him be your one, hoping that second-round Jonathan Mingo could also emerge for you. I mean, it was very ambitious, in my opinion, from the Panthers to sort of assume that this was the way that was going to, help Bryce Young emerge. And sure, they end up signing Miles Sanders as well in that offseason. I think they brought in Hayden Hurst. So they at least attempted to sort of cover up their holes on offense a little bit. They did not do a good job, though. And Bryce Young definitely suffered from it. Now, I'm definitely not ready to write him out, and we're going to be diving into the specific breakdown of how can the Panthers right the ship with Bryce Young in the next segment. But This is getting into, and I know, I hate talking about getting into do or die time, especially for a guy who's only played one season. Bryce Young is very likely going to get his entire rookie contract to try and prove himself, and in that time, the Panthers will be ideally trying to build up the remainder of the roster, probably specifically that offense, to help him grow along the way, but truthfully speaking here, not to be overly critical, but if this ends up a Justin Fields similar situation where they throw a quarterback in there with basically no pieces, they are trying to make up lost ground over the next few years, and ultimately it doesn't pan out by the time that he needs to get paid, and ultimately the franchise decides to go in another direction. Just saying, that wouldn't shock me. Hopefully that's not the case though, because Bryce Young was very good at Alabama, and I think that he does still have a lot of potential to come into his own, but Panthers have he has a lot of room to grow, as do the Panthers. Now, they did this offseason make a number of moves to try and give Bryce a better offense around him. They ended up making a trade for Deontay Johnson, who can hopefully emerge as a more reliable wide receiver one. They ended up moving off of a very solid cornerback in Dane Jackson to get Deontay Johnson. Johnson is somebody who, is still a very solid wide receiver. Didn't score any touchdowns in 17 games in 2022. I feel like the fantasy football community at that point sort of deemed Deontay Johnson as not a good wide receiver, but he's been dealing with a lot of inconsistency at the quarterback position. Deontay Johnson has, and I still think he has some left in the tank. He's still a very young player at 24, 25 years old. I could be underestimating that a little bit. 28 years old, yeah. So, he's not young, but I definitely don't think that he should be past his prime. And maybe it was a fluke season in 2021 when he was a Pro Bowler, I believe was the season. But I still think that, he's a reliable player, and definitely far more reliable than anything the Panthers had last season. They additionally splurge a little bit on the offensive line. Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. It is a 5-year, $100 million deal for Hunt. 4 years, $53 million for Lewis. It's a lot of money to give out, especially to guards as opposed to, offensive tackles. But I sort of look at it, and there weren't a lot of, really good tackles out on the open market. So at that point, the Panthers, they understand maybe it's not a great long-term financial decision, but they need to get Bryce Young an offensive line, and they need to do so now before it's too late on that mark with Bryce Young. So I understand the decision here. Are Hunt and Lewis, perennial all-pro players? The chances are probably not. I believe Hunt has made a Pro Bowl, at least. I'll double check that on the fly right here. Robert Hunt is a good player, and has not made a Pro Bowl, but, has a lot of experience since coming into the league, and was once a highly drafted player being taken in the second round by Miami in 2020. So I think both of these are fine signings, not giving them A-pluses on the deals, but doing things necessary to try and help improve the roster for the Panthers. Now, looking at their offense as a whole, it was a mess last year. Last in total yards, last in passing, tied for last with the Patriots in scoring. This was a team that was just bottom of the barrel in pretty much every statistic, and I think that they have a chance to definitely be better this year. One thing I'm definitely keeping my eyes on, at least, is when Jonathan Brooks does end up returning from injury. From what I've heard, it's supposed to be week 3, week 4. It's when we should see the former Texas star making his NFL debut. Him and Chuba Hubbard can be a solid, at least a good enough backfield that, there's some promise there. Just the Panthers need to find an identity right now, something to rally behind. And Bryce Young, you're asking him to overcome a lot as things currently stand. And I think that, whether it's establishing a run game or if it is Bryce Young sort of just emerging on his own, this offense needs something to sort of hang its hat on, and they definitely do not have that right now. Defensively, I mean, it's not a great group. The numbers are a little bit deceiving in terms of total yard and passing defense. That's in large part due to the fact, though, that other teams didn't really have to throw the ball against the Panthers. They're a team that only scored 13.9, I believe it was, points per game. So it's not like opposing offenses were, full guns blazing the entire 4 quarters. And that's why I think their run defense is also knocked down a bit. But, when this defense is fully healthy, do you feel like there's a number of solid defensive players? J.C. Horn, again, really struggling with the injuries, but when he's available, he is one of the great young cornerbacks in the NFL. They end up making the trade that sort of sends off a young cornerback in exchange for Deontay Johnson, so it's maybe a little bit light on the back end, but the linebacking core, I think, is overall pretty solid. Underrated signing in Josey Jewell, formerly of the Denver Broncos. That's a good signing. Jewell coming actually to his former defensive coordinator in Ejiro Evero, where Jewell had a career high in tackles in 2022 with Evero in charge, with 128 tackles for Jewell in just 13 games. Very impressive. So I think that he could really emerge for this Panthers defense. Shaq Thompson, they signed Jadeveon Clowney as well to a 1-year deal. So this is a team that, defensively as well has a lot of holes, but you do sort of see the groundwork of they could be solid. They can, at this point, the Panthers just want to stay in games and give Bryce Young a chance to have maybe some higher leverage moments at this point. But looking at their schedule, I mean, overall, the Panthers, this season isn't about winning games per se. That obviously, it's a lot more about the process, the vision of what this ultimately does look like, and Panthers are in the top half of the league in terms of easiest schedules for the upcoming year. But that being said, Panthers are one of the worst teams in the NFL. So not exactly expecting all too many wins for the Panthers this season. Breaking it down, I mean, they play in an NFC South, which I don't think there are any world beaters there. Out of divisional matchups, you have some, I'd say, versus the Bengals in week 4, versus the Chiefs in week 12, at Philly week 14, versus Dallas week 15. I mean, those are tough matchups. I'm looking at the games like week 16 at home versus a Cardinals team that I think can be a little bit better than a lot of people sort of think. Looking at week 2 at home against a Chargers team that is sort of going through a little bit of a retooling right now. Those are the games that I'm sort of most intrigued in, and just seeing, again, can Bryce Young sort of put up points with the best of them as well. But ultimately, I have the Panthers coming out to just 4 wins this season. I predict they're going to be 4-13, which would be a step forward from last season for whatever it's worth. Now, they actually have their draft pick this year, so now they can hopefully actually put it to use. Probably going to be one of the top spots in the draft, and it will be very interesting to see what the Panthers choose to do with that pick, which is sort of when I want to go in depth with a little bit more and talking about what does this rebuilding, retooling process for the Carolina Panthers and for Bryce Young look like. So we are going to be diving into that. Let us know what your thoughts are on the upcoming season for the Panthers, as we are going to continue on that conversation on the other side of the break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.